North Korea just unveiled a weapon system that has military analysts in Seoul scrambling to recalculate every defensive assumption they've made for the past 2 decades. We're not talking about another ballistic missile test or nuclear saber rattling. We're talking about a precision-guided artillery system with a demonstrated accuracy rate that has increased by 340% compared to North Korea's previous generation of border weapons. 340%. That's not incremental improvement. That's a fundamental transformation in Pyongyang's ability to hold South Korean targets at risk, and it's forcing the entire strategic calculus on the Korean peninsula to shift in ways most Western observers haven't even begun to understand yet. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications because we specialize in breaking down the military developments that slip past mainstream coverage but fundamentally alter the strategic landscape. Today's analysis is essential viewing for anyone trying to understand how the balance of power in Northeast Asia is evolving in real time. I'm going to show you exactly what North Korea has deployed, why South Korea's response tells us more than any official statement ever could, and what this means for the 8,500 American troops stationed within artillery range of the DMZ. We'll cover the technical specifications of this new artillery system that make it genuinely dangerous, the strategic doctrine shift it represents for the Kim regime, and the cascading effects this is having on alliance structures, defense procurement, and deterrence calculations from Seoul to Tokyo to Washington. By the end, you'll understand why this isn't just another North Korean provocation cycle. This is Pyongyang demonstrating capabilities that change the fundamental equation of how conflict on the Korean peninsula would actually unfold, and South Korea's accelerated counter-deployment reveals just how seriously military planners are taking this threat. Now let's talk about why artillery matters so much in this specific geographic and strategic context. The Korean peninsula represents one of the most militarized borders on the planet, with over 2 million North Korean troops positioned within striking distance of Seoul, a metropolitan area of 25 million people located just 35 miles south of the demilitarized zone. For decades, North Korea's primary conventional threat to South Korea has been its massed artillery positioned in hardened sites along the border. These aren't mobile systems. They're dug into mountains, reinforced with concrete, and positioned to rain fire on the South Korean capital with minimal warning. The strategic problem has always been volume versus precision. North Korea possessed somewhere between 8,000 and 14,000 artillery pieces pointed south, according to assessments from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. That's an overwhelming number. But the overwhelming majority of these systems were aging Soviet-era designs with accuracy measured in hundreds of meters at best. When military planners game out North Korean artillery scenarios, they calculate casualties based on massive volume fire saturating urban areas. The assumption has been that North Korea would need to fire thousands of rounds to guarantee hits on specific high-value targets: military command centers, government facilities, critical infrastructure nodes. This assumption shaped everything from civil defense planning to counter-battery positioning to missile defense priorities. What changed in November 2025 is that North Korea conducted live fire demonstrations of what they're calling the Pukguksong-3 self-propelled artillery system, a 152mm howitzer mounted on a domestically produced chassis with integrated fire control systems that incorporate what appears to be Chinese-derived precision guidance technology. The tests, observed by South Korean and U.S. intelligence assets, showed consistent accuracy within 15 meters at ranges exceeding 40 kilometers. 15 meters. To put that in perspective, North Korea's previous generation KN-09 system showed circular error probable. That's the radius within which 50% of rounds land, of approximately 60 meters under optimal conditions. The Pukguksong-3 is demonstrating 4 times better accuracy, and it's doing so with systems that can be repositioned after firing to avoid counter-battery strikes. South Korea's Ministry of National Defense initially downplayed the tests in public statements, calling them routine provocations. But what the ministry was saying publicly and what it was doing operationally told 2 completely different stories. Within 72 hours of the North Korean demonstration, South Korea accelerated deployment of its K9A2 Thunder self-propelled howitzer systems to forward positions along the DMZ, moved up the delivery schedule for Israeli-made Iron Dome batteries by 6 months, and quietly doubled the operational tempo of counter-battery radar systems monitoring the border. You don't make those moves, moves that cost hundreds of millions of dollars and reveal defensive priorities to your adversary, unless you're genuinely concerned about a capability shift that changes your defensive calculations. Let me show you exactly what makes the Pukuksong 3 different and why it represents a genuine inflection point rather than just another incremental upgrade in North Korea's arsenal. The system combines three elements that North Korea has been developing separately for years but has now integrated into a single platform. First, the artillery piece itself is a 150 mm howitzer with a maximum range of 43 kilometers, putting it firmly in the category of long-range indirect fire systems. That range means it can hit targets deep in South Korean territory while remaining positioned behind North Korea's fortified border defenses. Second, the mobility platform is significant. This isn't a towed system that requires setup time and becomes a sitting target for counter-battery fire. The Pukuksong 3 is mounted on an 8-wheeled chassis that gives it genuine cross-country mobility. North Korean state media showed the system moving at speeds approaching 60 kilometers per hour on improved roads, and demonstrating the ability to emplace, fire a 6-round mission, and displace in under 8 minutes. 8 minutes is fast enough to complicate South Korean counter-battery targeting, which typically requires 10 to 15 minutes from detection to effective suppression fire. Third, and this is where it gets genuinely interesting, the fire control system incorporates what Western analysts believe is a derivative of Chinese precision guidance technology. The system uses a combination of GPS-type satellite navigation, which North Korea has limited access to through Chinese systems, inertial guidance that doesn't require external signals, and what appears to be terminal guidance corrections based on radar or optical sensors in the final phase of flight. This isn't quite the precision you get from guided missiles, but it's accurate enough to hit specific buildings rather than just saturating city blocks. Think about what that means for a moment. For decades, South Korea's civil defense strategy for dealing with North Korean artillery has been based on the assumption that any attack would be massive, but relatively indiscriminate. Populations would shelter in metro stations and underground facilities, while counter-battery systems tried to suppress North Korean firing positions. Critical infrastructure was hardened based on the assumption that it was unlikely to be hit with precision in the opening hours of conflict. Command and control facilities were protected, but not to the same standard as if they faced precision strike threats. The Pukuksong 3 changes that calculation completely. Now North Korea can potentially target specific facilities with the first salvo. Presidential command bunkers, military headquarters, communications nodes, power generation facilities, and they can do so with systems that are mobile enough to avoid immediate suppression. This doesn't mean North Korean artillery has become invulnerable or that they can destroy South Korea's military command structure at will, but it does mean that the opening phase of any conflict now involves much higher probability of precision strikes on high-value targets than previous planning assumed. Here's where the strategic implications start to compound. South Korea has spent the past 15 years building one of the most sophisticated military forces in Asia, focused heavily on precision strike capabilities, advanced surveillance systems, and qualitative superiority over North Korean mass. The assumption has been that in any conflict, South Korea's technological edge would allow it to degrade North Korean command and control, suppress artillery positions, and establish information dominance relatively quickly. This assumption shaped procurement priorities, training focus, and operational doctrine, but precision artillery creates a time compression problem. If North Korea can hit critical nodes with precision in the opening minutes of conflict, before South Korea's more sophisticated systems have time to locate and suppress the firing positions, then the window for establishing that technological advantage narrows dramatically. South Korea's K9A2 systems are more accurate and have longer range than the Pukuksong 3. South Korean counter-battery radar is more sophisticated. South Korean air power would eventually dominate the battlefield, but eventually might be too late if critical command facilities or integrated air defense nodes are hit with precision before those advantages can be brought to bear. This is why South Korea's response has been so rapid and so revealing. The acceleration of K9A2 deployments isn't just about having more artillery. It's about forward-positioning counter-battery systems that can respond to North Korean fire within the compressed timeline that precision weapons create. The expedited Iron Dome deployment isn't about protecting cities from mass artillery fire. Iron Dome was designed to intercept rockets and shorter-range missiles. It's about creating a terminal defense layer for specific high-value facilities that are now at higher risk of precision targeting. But there's another dimension to this that deserves attention, and it's one that has implications far beyond the immediate military balance on the Korean peninsula. North Korea obtaining precision guidance technology for artillery systems tells us something important about how military technology is proliferating in ways that traditional non-proliferation frameworks weren't designed to address. This isn't nuclear weapons technology, which is tightly controlled and relatively easy to detect when it's being transferred. This isn't ballistic missile technology, which requires large facilities and visible testing programs. This is precision guidance technology, fire control systems, satellite navigation components that can be transferred in small packages, tested in ways that look like conventional artillery exercises, and integrated into existing weapons platforms without requiring massive new infrastructure. According to analysis from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, the components visible in North Korean state media footage of the Pukguksong 3 show clear lineage to Chinese fire control systems that have been exported to multiple countries under civilian and dual-use export licenses. North Korea likely obtained these components through third-party transfers, reverse engineering of systems acquired through intermediaries, and possibly direct technical cooperation with Chinese entities operating outside official government channels. What this means is that North Korea has demonstrated a pathway for acquiring precision strike capabilities that doesn't require domestic development of advanced technology. They can source components globally, integrate them into domestically produced platforms, and field systems that narrow the qualitative gap with more advanced militaries. This pathway is available not just to North Korea, but to any nation or non-state actor with sufficient resources and technical expertise to integrate commercial components into military systems. Now let's examine South Korea's broader response, because the artillery deployments are only the most visible element of a more comprehensive strategic adjustment. In December 2025, South Korea's Agency for Defense Development announced an accelerated timeline for its long-range surface-to-surface guided weapon program, which is developing precision strike missiles with ranges exceeding 800 kilometers. That range would allow South Korea to hold targets across the entire North Korean interior at risk, with precision weapons launched from well behind the DMZ. This is significant because it represents a shift in South Korea's declaratory strategy. For years, South Korea maintained a public posture emphasizing defensive capabilities and deterrence through denial, making it too costly for North Korea to attack by ensuring strong defense. The accelerated development of long-range precision strike weapons suggests a shift toward deterrence through punishment, ensuring that any North Korean attack would trigger devastating retaliation against North Korean leadership and military targets, regardless of how the initial exchange unfolds. This shift is happening quietly, without major public announcements or changes to alliance doctrine. But it's visible in procurement priorities, deployment patterns, and the language South Korean defense officials use in closed-door discussions with U.S. counterparts. According to reporting from Yonhap News Agency, South Korean military briefings to the National Assembly's Defense Committee in January 2026 included explicit discussion of preemptive strike options against North Korean artillery positions in crisis scenarios, something that would have been politically unthinkable even 2 years ago. The United States is watching these developments with deep interest and some concern. On one hand, a more capable South Korean military that can defend itself and contribute to regional deterrence aligns with long-standing U.S. objectives. On the other hand, South Korea developing robust strike capabilities and considering preemptive options creates escalation dynamics that could draw the United States into a conflict that starts before diplomatic options are exhausted. The 2,800 U.S. troops stationed in South Korea aren't just there to fight if war breaks out. They're there as a tripwire, ensuring U.S. involvement and thereby deterring North Korean aggression. But tripwires work best when all parties believe there's time for decisions and de-escalation. Precision weapons on both sides compress that decision timeline. There's also a technology transfer dimension that has U.S. defense planners paying close attention. South Korea has become a major arms exporter, particularly to Poland, Australia, and Middle Eastern nations. The precision artillery and missile systems South Korea is deploying in response to North Korean capabilities are exactly the systems that other nations want to acquire. U.S. defense officials have quietly expressed concern that South Korean exports could include technology that has U.S. origins or that was developed through joint U.S.-South Korean programs, potentially spreading capabilities to regions where U.S. would prefer to maintain technological advantage. Japan is also recalculating its defensive posture based on North Korean precision artillery developments. While Japanese territory isn't within range of North Korean ground-based artillery, the same precision guidance technology that's improving artillery accuracy can be applied to the short and medium-range missiles that absolutely can reach Japan. Japanese self-defense force assessments, leaked to Kyodo News, indicate concern that North Korea is applying similar precision improvements to its KN-23 and KN-24 short-range ballistic missiles, which could threaten U.S. bases in Japan and Japanese critical infrastructure with much higher accuracy than previous systems. This is driving Japan toward closer defense integration with South Korea, something that was politically difficult for both nations given historical tensions. But shared threat perceptions are proving stronger than historical grievances. In February 2026, South Korea and Japan conducted their first joint missile defense exercise explicitly focused on North Korean precision strike scenarios, involving data sharing between early warning systems and coordinated engagement planning. This represents a significant evolution in regional security architecture, driven directly by North Korean capability developments. Now here's where we need to acknowledge some important limitations and alternative perspectives, because the narrative I've presented so far emphasizes the genuine capability advancement that North Korea has demonstrated. But there are reasons to be skeptical about how transformative this actually is, and those skeptical perspectives deserve consideration. First, demonstrated accuracy in controlled tests doesn't necessarily translate to battlefield effectiveness. North Korea conducted these tests under optimal conditions, with prepared firing positions, pre-surveyed targets, and likely multiple attempts before successful demonstrations were shown to media. In actual conflict conditions, with counter-battery fire incoming, electronic warfare degrading guidance systems, and the chaos of combat operations, actual accuracy might be significantly worse than test performance suggests. Second, precision guidance systems require maintenance, trained operators, and logistical support that North Korea's military has historically struggled to provide. North Korea fields large numbers of weapon systems but has chronic problems maintaining them operationally. It's entirely possible that only a small percentage of Pukguksong 3 systems would actually function as designed in wartime, with the rest degraded by maintenance issues or operator error. Third, South Korea's counter-battery capabilities are extremely sophisticated and are specifically designed to detect and suppress artillery systems before they can conduct extended fire missions. Even if North Korean artillery achieves precision hits with initial salvos, South Korean counterfire would likely neutralize most systems within minutes, limiting the total damage they could inflict. The scenario where North Korean precision artillery fundamentally changes conflict outcomes assumes those systems can survive long enough to matter, and that assumption may not hold against South Korean defensive capabilities. Alternative analysis from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace suggests that North Korea's artillery demonstrations are primarily intended for domestic consumption and diplomatic leverage rather than representing genuine operational capabilities. According to this perspective, Kim Jong-un needs to demonstrate technological progress to domestic audiences and to international interlocutors to maintain his position as a leader, advancing North Korea's power. The actual battlefield significance may be much more limited than the demonstrations suggest. There's also the question of whether precision artillery actually changes North Korea's strategic calculus, or just gives them a more efficient way to pursue the same coercive strategy they've always employed. North Korea's fundamental strategic challenge hasn't changed. They cannot defeat South Korea and the United States in sustained conventional conflict. Their strategy has always been based on making the costs of conflict so high that it deters military action against the regime. Precision artillery might make that coercive threat more credible at the margin, but it doesn't solve North Korea's fundamental strategic weakness. These skeptical perspectives are worth considering because they guard against overreaction and excessive threat inflation. Not every weapons development represents a fundamental shift in strategic balance. Sometimes systems look more impressive in demonstrations than they prove in actual operations. Sometimes capability improvements are real but not strategically decisive. Military planning requires taking potential threats seriously, but it also requires realistic assessment of actual capabilities versus demonstrated performance in controlled conditions. That said, the South Korean response suggests that military planners in Seoul assess this development as significant enough to warrant substantial operational and procurement adjustments. These are professionals with access to detailed intelligence on North Korean capabilities, not outside observers relying on media reports. Their assessment that this requires accelerated defensive measures carries weight. The question isn't whether North Korean precision artillery is perfect or whether it solves all of Pyongyang's strategic problems. The question is whether it's good enough to change specific scenarios and force adjustments to defensive planning. The South Korean response indicates that the answer is yes. So where does this leave us, and what should we be watching for as this situation continues to develop? The North Korean demonstration of precision artillery capabilities and South Korea's rapid response represent one data point in a broader pattern of military modernization and capability proliferation across Northeast Asia. North Korea is narrowing specific capability gaps through technology acquisition and integration. South Korea is responding with both defensive improvements and offensive capability development. The United States is trying to manage alliance dynamics that are evolving faster than established frameworks anticipated. Japan is being drawn into closer security cooperation with South Korea by shared threat perceptions. China is watching these developments with concern about enhanced U.S. allied capabilities near its borders. The near-term indicators to watch include whether North Korea conducts additional demonstrations of precision artillery or applies similar technology to other weapons systems. If this was a one-time demonstration, it suggests more limited operational deployment. If we see repeated tests with different systems, it indicates more systematic capability improvement. Watch for South Korean deployment patterns along the DMZ. Accelerated forward positioning of counter-battery systems and missile defenses tells us how seriously Seoul assesses the threat in operational terms. Watch for U.S. force posture adjustments on the peninsula. Any significant changes to the positioning or alert status of U.S. forces would indicate assessment that conflict risks have increased. The longer-term question is whether these developments accelerate the arms competition dynamics that have been building on the Korean peninsula for years, or whether they create enough mutual concern about conflict escalation that they eventually contribute to renewed diplomatic engagement. History suggests that arms races rarely lead directly to intentional war, but they do create conditions where miscalculation and accidents become more consequential. The compression of decision timelines that precision weapons create, on both sides now, reduces the space for de-escalation once crisis begins. What's clear is that the strategic situation on the Korean peninsula is not static. The capabilities both sides can bring to bear in conflict scenarios are evolving, and those evolutions change the calculations that leaders make about deterrence, crisis management, and acceptable risk. North Korea's precision artillery represents one element of that evolution. South Korea's response represents another. Both are part of a dynamic that bears close watching, because this is one of the few places on Earth where major military powers remain in direct confrontation with minimal buffer zones and compressed warning times. This is the kind of development that mainstream coverage will reduce to headline news and move past within a day or two. But if you're still watching, you understand why it matters beyond the immediate headlines. This is about how military technology proliferates, how it changes strategic calculations, and how nations respond when the capabilities they face evolve in ways that challenge their defensive assumptions. At States News, we're going to continue tracking these developments because understanding the weapons, the strategy, and the second and third order effects is exactly what separates genuine analysis from surface-level coverage. If this analysis added value to your understanding, subscribe for the next breakdown. There's a lot more happening beneath the surface than most sources are covering, and we'll be here to show you exactly what it means.